Good morning. Welcome to our next session. I am Dr. Reginald Ellis, Dean, Office of Graduate Education at Clark Atlanta University, and I'm honored to moderate this upcoming session entitled Finance and Assets, Grad PLUS Reform and the Political Economy of HBCU Graduate Education. Today, we have two of the leading graduate deans in the higher educational space here with us this morning to discuss the impacts of financing graduate education in the 21st century, specifically post Grad PLUS loan going away. Before we get into our conversation, I would like to pause and allow our presenters to introduce themselves. And I will start with Dean Hacker at Norfolk State, and then go to Dr. Scott Challener at Hampton Institute. Dean Hacker.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Desi Hacker. I'm the Dean at Norfolk State University. And we'll talk a little bit more about our academic portfolio, but I've been at Norfolk State for the last 26 years in various roles, especially in the graduate education space. I'm happy to be with you this morning.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Dr. Scott Challener. I am Dean of the Graduate College at Hampton University. This is my fifth year here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
All right, let's go ahead and get started with the conversation. As this conversation goes on, if you have any questions that you would like to pose to us as it relates to this particular presentation, please use the Q&A function, and we will monitor that throughout our presentation and raise those questions as they come up. I'm going to start very quickly with a high-level overview to frame our conversation, and then we will jump right into our discussion. As you all know, we are currently facing uh, we're currently facing the end of the Grad PLUS loan, and so I've entitled this presentation OBBA Impact on Graduate Education. This is a presentation that I presented to the academic leadership team here at Clark Atlanta University, just so our leaders would understand what was coming. I was in Florida for 17 years, and in the state of Florida, we deal with hurricanes, and for many years prior to about 2017, many individuals were not really concerned when they heard warnings or tales of a hurricane coming until one came, Hurricane Hermine in 2017. And so since then, everyone now understands the impact and importance of listening to forecasters. And so my theory was to frame this idea around Hurricane OBBA approaching and the impacts it will have on graduate education at large, but also specifically on Black higher education. The storm is forming the policy overview. And on beginning July 1st of this year, the Graduate Plus loan will be eliminated. What does that mean for current graduate students and graduate students who will begin their program on July 1st? There will be an annual federal loan cap per year of $20,500 per year, with a lifetime graduate loan cap from their master's throughout of $100,000 that they will be able to receive in federal funding. This will be an immediate impact on the affordability and enrollment. Now, on our call, we have a public a state supported institution and two private institutions. And so it's going to be interesting to hear how both of our types of institutions are dealing with that last piece, the enrollment, the immediate impact on affordability and enrollment. So let's look at the forecast or the storm's aftermath. The financial forecast on enrollment risk. What we are embracing for, or bracing for rather, is reduced borrowing capacities for the federal loans, which will and which is going to pivot many of our scholars away from the federal loan system into the private market due to the loss of the Graduate Plus loan safety net. Second thing is there's going to be a potential delay on doctoral completions due to the lack of funding, the lack of resources. And when we think about the Graduate Plus loan, many of these scholars are using these funds to live, to pay rent, to purchase grocery, and just everyday living. So these students are not just using these funds to cover their tuition and fees, they're also using these funds for everyday living needs. And all of the institutions on this call are R2 classification, which means they're producing at least 20 doctoral scholars per academic year, which places all of us at risk of maintaining that R2 classification benchmark. Projected impact on my current university, Clark Atlanta University. With the increased out-of-pocket costs for graduate scholars, there will be potential enrollment decline in graduate programs, higher attrition risk among dissertation phase students, which will create a competitive disadvantage among HBCU peers. Now, again, with the current administration, these policies came fast and furious, and many of us in the graduate educational space and in the R2 HBCU graduate educational space have been talking about this very directly to figure out how we are all going to offset these potential losses. So here's a strategic response. One, we are proposing temporary suspension of selected graduate fees for doctoral scholars in their last 3 semesters of their dissertation process, which will lower the out-of-pocket costs for many of our graduate scholars. We're working directly with our financial aid, our partners in financial aid and scholarships to expand institutional fellowships and assistantships. And we also are launching financial literacy and planning workshops so that our graduate scholars understand the impact. So they I'm sorry, so they will understand the impact of the loan going away, but also understand the impact of what the private loan market looks like. And then we are really working with our academic partners and the academic deans and department chairs and the faculty to look at and consider revising their doctoral program and their curriculum to ensure that scholars can earn their degrees in 5 years rather than the national average of 7. So in that way, many of these scholars can leave their institution under the $20,500 per year, $100,000 lifetime cap. So what we will argue is and encourage all of our provosts and CFOs to consider is align our institutional response strategy, identify bridge funding mechanisms, support communication plans to current and future students. And one of the things that we've all learned from our partners in CGS is communicate, communicate, communicate. And then we also want to protect enrollment growth and our R2 trajectory. So at this time, I will pivot the conversation to my colleagues. So we just kind of set the table, and I'll pivot my conversation to our colleagues. And the first question that I will ask, and I'll also bring up their presentation, but while I'm bringing that presentation up, I will ask the question, how do federal loan policies, including Grad PLUS loans, shape equitable access to graduate education at HBCUs? And I will start that question with Dean Hacker.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis. I think much of what you said highlight how it will affect graduate education at HBCUs. If you think about it, many of our students come to us with finance issues being of utmost concern for them. And so the graduate assistantships that we provide for doctoral students, but even our master's students who want to further their degree have financial concerns. So this cap has strong implications on students maybe deciding to delay graduate education, may impact them in terms of continuing or persisting if there are issues in terms of financial aid allowing them to complete their graduate degrees. And then similar to you, we are aspiring to R2 status, in which doctoral education is important. And with programs being 4, 5, 6 years, and 7 in your case, it's going to hit that enrollment cap really quickly, which will create challenges for our students.
Okay. And Scott, I'm going to go ahead and bring up your slide.
Yeah, thanks. While you're doing that, I'll just add a couple things. One, we know that a significant percentage of our students come from HBCUs as undergrads, right? So that's important, right? Because when you look at the one thing that Desi and I were talking a lot about before as we were preparing for this conversation is when you think about where our graduate student population is coming from, we have to, this is both the awesome force of HBCUs and a challenge, right? So that we support our undergraduate students to pursue graduate degrees at our institutions, but our undergraduate students also carry higher debt loads, right? They have greater debt burdens, and so they face greater risks. And so those are that's one part of the puzzle that we want to unpack a little bit with you all today. Um, and I think, so the broader takeaway for us was that we can't really talk about graduate education without talking about undergraduate education. So I know at Hampton it's about 36% of our undergraduates. I think from our peers at North Carolina A&T, I think that's around 40%. So I think you can see in that 30 to 40% window, that's what we're talking about in terms of our student population. And so looking really closely and getting better data on what kinds of debt burdens our undergraduate students are bringing into the graduate space is going to be really important because that will affect their ability to borrow within these new loan caps, and their ability to continue and complete those degrees like we're talking about. So thanks for pulling up the slides. Can you run to the next one? Okay, so just really briefly, you already mentioned this, Reggie, but we did want to put this out there to everyone in the room. Like thinking about HBCUs and the HBCU ecology, it's really important to think about, all of our differences, right? Our shared missions, our shared histories, but also key points of difference, right? So one of the advantages of us here is that we have two private institutions, Clark Atlanta and Hampton, in the room, and then we have a public, Norfolk State, and and um and the other piece that I wanted to say is that there are differences both, even within those groups. So there's just a little picture here. I'm not going to run through all of this, but we're an R2 institution. We have about 620 graduate students. That's a mix of on-ground and online programs. We are master's heavy, but we do have PhDs in atmospheric science, business administration, counseling, um, education management, nursing, physics, and planetary science. And we have some professional doctoral programs in pharmacy and physical therapy. And we also have some professional programs in our master's, although I should put professional in scare quotes, right? Because we know that our understanding and how we think about professional degrees as graduate professionals and in the higher education community may be at odds with how the federal government and federal policy designates those degrees. And I bring that up because, as we know right now, there's only, I believe, 13, right, professional degrees that have been designated. And right now, as we speak, nursing is not one of them, right? Speech pathology is not one of them, right? Audiology is not one of them. Physical therapy is not one of them, right? So I just want to say that because when I say professional, I'm thinking in the capacious in sense of that term, just to include all of our degrees that are so important to what we do at Hampton. Next slide, please.
And Norfolk State is a public university. And we're located in Norfolk, Virginia, and it's classified as a research college and university, but it's aspiring to R2 status. And as I indicated, it has implications for us in terms of funding doctoral students. Our total enrollment is about 5,800, and we have about 729 graduate students. We're pretty master's heavy right now with 3 PhD programs in materials science, social work, and clinical psychology. But we have 4 in the works of going through the approval process. And then we have a fair number of certificate programs right now that we're growing those as well. Next slide.
Okay, so this is just how I think a little bit. I just wanted to say a little bit about so my background. I have a PhD in literatures in English, right? So in English, and when I think about the political economy of graduate education at HBCUs, I wanted to put down a couple of signposts. So in a new way, in the 21st century, debt is a defining feature of economic life. That was not always the case, but it is for all of us in this room, no doubt, and it certainly is true for our students. Following mortgages, student debt is the second highest consumer debt category in the country, right? So thinking about that and putting that frame on it really puts, I think, um, puts a finger on exactly what we're talking about and the true scale and significance of this conversation and its implications. And then just one more bullet point here. Tuition has increased 650 times faster than the consumer price index. So if you just think about paying, we've been talking a lot about the price of gas in our national conversation. But if gas increased if the cost of a gallon of gas increased at 650 times, we'd be paying $20 or more, right, for that commodity. So education is a unique commodity in our current economy. And what economists call the education premium, that's the amount of money you earn on the basis of having a degree versus not having one, is shrinking at the undergraduate level. That is a new thing in the 21st century for the US economy, right? And those are quotes from Annie McClanahan, a scholar in my field, right, who thinks a lot about the relationship between debt and service work and labor and literature.
So although the premium for education is under attack in our country, we know that the graduate education premium is still there. So if you look at this slide, you'll see that as you go up in educational attainment, your salary goes up, your rates of employment goes up. And so there is still a benefit for students getting graduate degrees. And they can't get graduate degrees if they don't get an undergraduate degree. And so these things are they are tied to each other. We cannot separate them out. Next slide. So what this means is that pathways to graduate education is really critical, and that financial aid or federal aid policies have direct implications for all of us, both at the undergraduate and the graduate level. Because if we start removing financial assistance to students, it's going to impact who will enroll, who stays in, and then who graduates. Because federal aid fills those gaps, especially for students that we tend to serve at HBCUs. We tend to have a greater percentage of lower wealth household students, first gen students, and working adults. So they will be the ones who will bear this burden the hardest. And so we need to look at this both as a federal aid issue and also an equity issue because it's a pathway for our students to get ahead and close some of the wealth gaps that exist in our society. Next slide.
Yeah, I also just want to add it's a public good issue, right? We know that our graduates, right, who leave with advanced degrees serve our communities, right? They serve us, they serve our communities, and they serve our industries where we need them most. So another thing that Desi and I were talking about, and I hope we can all talk about, is value, right? And the value of a graduate education degree is not just about ROI. Right? It's about the social value. It's about the significance that a graduate degree makes for people who live in our communities. So I just wanted to say that out loud. Reggie talked a little bit about this, but we did want to just give you a quick primer on Grad Plus. So, it started in 2005 and it is ending July 1st or June 30th of this year. What it actually is an unsubsidized federal loan, meaning interest accrues immediately as soon as a student borrower takes it out. And it allows graduate and professional students to borrow up to the full cost of attendance minus other aid with no lifetime cap. And it was often used for tuition and living expenses. I highlighted living expenses because I think that's really critical, right? When you think about the undergrads, they don't have those, right? But we know that our graduate students carry significant living expenses in a different way than our undergraduates do, right? It's not that they don't have them, but the living expenses for graduate students are much more significant. Um, and just regarding the lifetime cap, actually, just yesterday was announced that the lifetime cap will now apply for anyone who's still carrying a Graduate Plus loan. So we can talk about that too. That was clarified by the Department of Education. So anyway, Grad Plus loans, they require minimal credit check, and that's really important because it wasn't tied to credit score. Right. Did take a quick look at bankruptcy and other key markers of financial worthiness, but it wasn't a full-blown credit check, right, that we might experience if we're taking out a significant loan. It offered fixed interest rates, 8.94% for 25-26, and it had a significant origination fee, right, 4.228%. And then it allowed repayment deferment while students were in school. And most Graduate Plus loans are repaid on a 10-year repayment plan unless the borrower extended up to 25 years, and that was based on the total loan volume, with interest during school capitalized as soon as the borrower enters repayment. And I said this already, so I'll skip that part, but I think thinking more about professional and graduate degrees is really important. And then the last thing I wanted to say, just because I think it's really important, we all know this, but this is just important information as you're talking with your graduate students, your graduate student populations who may still take out a Graduate Plus loan before June 30th. There is an interim exception in place that allows students who are already enrolled in the Graduate Plus program before that ending termination date to continue under the previous cost of attendance minus other financial assistance loan limits. And that exception lasts for the student's expected time to credential. That's the federal language, and that is defined as the lesser of 3 academic years or the remaining length of their current program. So that really matters as we continue to talk about research doctoral degrees and the time to degree, right? It's 3 academic years or the remaining length of the current program as of July 1st. Right, so that's an important marker of what's to come. And then you should know that if a student transfers a program, withdraws, or exceeds that original program length, they are no longer eligible for that legacy loan provision. And they will be transferred out of the Graduate Plus provisions altogether. So what I wanted to talk about or mention in terms of the upshot for political economy, if we think about that, is the Graduate Plus expanded access during its 21-year run, and it reproduced structural inequity, right? So that contradiction is both true, and that contradiction is part of the structure of this loan program. Next slide.
And just related to the previous slide, I just want to emphasize that often graduate students are using this to offset living expenses. And even though many of our doctoral programs in particular provide graduate assistantships, we all know that those graduate assistantships are not enough to really fully live off of. So it allowed for additional support for those students to complete their degree program. So we don't want them to take on full-time jobs and try to complete their programs. So it does have it can have a potentially significant impact on those students. So as we were thinking about this presentation, we were asking ourselves, what do we need to think about? What kinds of questions will help us dig into what are the implications for each of our institutions, be it private, public, nonprofit or for-profit. And so some of the questions that we came up with is what percentage of our students will be impacted and how will it affect our tuition revenue at our universities? And so at Norfolk State as a public institution that we have fewer doctoral PhD programs, we have a small percentage of our students who are actually using Grad PLUS loans. So it won't be as big of a hit right now. It will for those students who get it. But as we grow our doctoral portfolio, we are likely to start having more issues with students needing that to supplement their educational journey. Also, what percentage of undergraduate students are Pell eligible, and how many of those can carry debt into their graduate programs? As Scott, I think Scott said that we have about 40% of our graduate students are our undergraduate students. So those are those students who really rely heavily on financial aid and are likely carrying debt into the graduate education space as well. And then which graduate programs will exceed it just because of the cost of tuition? And for us at NSU, being a public institution, out-of-state students have twice the tuition rate than in-state students. Those students are going to hit those caps much sooner than our resident students. And so we are likely to take a hit on the number of students who are coming out of state if we cannot supplement that in some way in terms of providing support to those students. And Scott, I don't know if you want to share kind of from the Hampton perspective on some of those questions.
Yeah, just a little bit. So, I have been talking with some of our colleagues across the HBCU space about what percentage of their graduate tuition revenue is funded by Grad Plus. At Hampton in the previous academic year, that was we were looking at about $2.5 million of graduate tuition revenue. So what that translates into is risk, right? It's not going to be as substantial as it is at some of the institutions mentioned below at North Carolina A&T or Morgan State or Howard, which have great higher graduate enrollments, right? Where the risk is going to be more significant. But it is a risk nonetheless. And then, you know, Desi's student population, we were talking about this, but your under percentage of your under, we looked at IPEDS data, right? The percentage of undergraduate students who are Pell eligible at Norfolk State is higher than those who take out Pell grants than at Hampton, right? Um, so that's an important data point for thinking about this conversation and how we approach these questions and the problems and challenges that carry forward from them. And then I will say that, just I met just this week with our admitted students so far who are coming in the summer or fall 2026. And, a number of them are not from Hampton, but are from other HBCUs, right? We had students from North Carolina A&T, we had students from Spelman, we have students from other places. So it's important to think about this question in this space. I'm really glad that we're having this conversation. The lifetime loan caps, that last question, I am really concerned about our PharmD, our DPT, our programs that are more costly in our professional degrees that are not eligible currently for the higher loan caps as designated by the federal policy that's coming into place on July 1st. Next slide. Okay, so I wanted to share this. I was thinking about, both scholars like Andy McClanahan, and Chris Newfield, but also I've been following Robert Kelchin. Many of you may as well. But in his book Higher Ed Accountability, he wrote, and that was from 2018, so it's a bit old now, but still, this is what he says. The percentage of borrowers and the amount borrowed per student has increased, right, since 2005. Remember, 2005 is when Grad Plus kicked in, and the total student loan debt has increased quickly, nearly tripling just in the 11 years between 2005 and 2016 after adjusting for inflation. 40% of that 1.26 trillion, which now is 1.27, right? 40% of that debt is held by graduate and professional students, right? So about $750 billion of total student loan debt is held by students who are pursuing or pursued an undergraduate education, and 500 billion is held by graduate and professional students. And I wanted to just say that because when we think about the political economy of HBCUs, we want to think about the broader political economy of graduate education as well. These two have interaction with one another as well. Next slide. Okay. And this just sets the picture a little bit more specifically within HBCUs. So you have the undergraduate picture there, just so we can have that out there. This is according to the National Post-Secondary Student Aid Study. 81.4% of HBCU students receive some form of federal Title IV financial aid in the 2019-2020 academic year, compared to 54% of all students. 67, almost 68% receive a Pell Grant. 64% receive a federal student loan. Um, Among HBCU students who do receive that Title IV aid, the average amount is 13,126. The average Pell is 5,050, and the average federal student loan amount is 10,961 for HBCU students. And I added this particular statistic because I think this is important. African American bachelor degree recipients overall have an average of $52,000 in student loan debt that they're carrying with them. Nearly half of that is from loans they've taken out to pursue graduate degrees. So now shifting from that picture to Graduate Plus specifically, 30 Graduate Plus is about 37.7% of federal student loans that are given to graduate students at HBCUs. And that's compared to a little bit higher than at non-HBCUs, 33%. Critically, though, and this is important, um, while there is a larger share of HBCU students who rely on Grad PLUS loans, they actually carry lower balances than their non-HBCU peers. And I think that speaks a little bit, as the Century Foundation suggests, to the difference to what we offer at HBCUs, right? Which is an affordable graduate education. So, and now we could talk about what affordable looks like and what it means, but that's a really important point to think about. So students are taking out on average a bit less, right, at HBCUs than at our non-HBCUs counterparts. Next slide.
And so what this slide shows you, kind of from what Scott has been saying, is kind of who's going to be affected the most. So you will see that the percentage of Grad Plus borrowers really fall predominantly in the professional degrees across the board. So master's, research, doctorates have high enough debt, but the professional programs are the ones that are particularly going to be a problem for us as HBCUs. And how we address those issues is going to be part of the conversation that needs to happen over the next few years, trying to help navigate this for our students so that we can continue to promote those students who can do the value added to our communities. Next slide.
Yeah, so HBCUs, I think we all know this, but HBCUs are in a really challenging structural position, right? We're structurally precarious. We are less well-resourced with less cash on hand and smaller endowments and more first-generation, lower wealth Pell eligible students. At the same time, we perform a nationally recognized critical role in the political economy of the United States, both in terms of economic impact and labor, workforce development, and so on and so forth. The contemporary structural precarity of HBCUs is historical, right? But what it really means today is that HBCUs are not in a financial position to say no, right? It makes us more potentially vulnerable to corporate and philanthropic capture. And that precarity also means that we're less able to provide institutional aid to our graduate students. Desi mentioned this. And so did Reggie, right? But we need to be able to support our students now more than ever, but we are not fully capable of doing so. Um, Especially given the fact that some of our students have that disproportionate need for that aid. And then last but not least, this is a little bit of a difference between our two institutions, but one worth thinking about is we primarily, as HBCUs, support our graduate students through federal and state funding. Right. And in particular, I think about Title III, Part B, HBGI, but also NSF, NIH. And then for state, that varies, but in Virginia, at Hampton, we use the Virginia Tuition Assistance Grant, which funds our graduate students who are domiciled Virginia residents who are pursuing advanced degrees in health-related professions. All right. Desi, did you want to jump in here for a sec?
Yeah, in NSU, we actually have state-funded tuition fellowships, which can also support in-state and a percentage of out-of-state students. So the state provides that level of funding. But also, I think the concern is as there is increased competition for research grants and these limits with where we are in our country, with what that means and who we can serve, then there is concern about whether or not those grants might be at risk that provide a lot of support to our students as well.
Great. Next slide.
So basically, graduate enrollment has really expanded, especially at HBCU since the 70s. We all see the need for more um, a population in which we have more skilled, more knowledgeable personnel to work in our communities. And so public HBCUs just anchor that graduate system, enrolling a lot of our master's and doctoral students. And while undergraduate enrollment is declining across the board for many institutions, we find that graduate enrollment is either stable or rising. And I know at NSU, we see that we have more capacity for graduate enrollment, but we are almost at capacity in terms of our undergraduate enrollment. So a lot more focus has been on graduate enrollment. So this shift has allowed HBCUs to move from primarily undergraduate focused institutions to dual mission, with a lot of focus on graduate and professional programs. So we have a dual commitment to both our undergraduate and our graduate students. So this Grad PLUS long issue has direct implications for that growth as we move forward. Next slide.
Yeah, so we're coming to the end here, and we can wrap up. But I think one thing that Reggie and I have talked about, and Desi and I have talked about, is how the termination of Grad Plus, what it will mean practically for our students. And one thing it might do is push them into the private market, right? And on the one hand, it's not clear that the private market is ready for that and can even handle that. On the other hand, I know everyone in this room, I am sure, is very worried or concerned about our students and whether they will be vulnerable to a private market or lender that does not have that is not transparent and does not have the same regulatory framework that federal loans have, right? They have variable rates, they have different repayment plans, they may or may not be eligible depending on credit score, credit worthiness, FICO score, et cetera. There's a lot of questions out there. So there's a lot to talk about, but what can administrators do? This is just a list we came up with. Well, first and foremost, we got to keep talking to our graduate students, right? Especially about debt, about these issues, about their lives, about what inequality feels like and looks like for them on a daily basis. And broadly speaking, we need to talk about the cost and value of a graduate education and financial planning. Um, that's the most important one. I do want to see new partnerships with regional employers for HBCUs. I want to see more tuition assistance programs. I want to see more service commitments from the regional economies that we serve. And that means the kind of exchanges that you're probably familiar with, where a student will have some support to close the gaps that we're addressing here. And in exchange, they'll work for the industry or for the employer, right, for a number of years. I'd love to see more industry aligned curricular revisions within our institutions. And I really, this is a big one for me. I really want to see more partnerships in and among and between HBCUs. I do think at the end of the day, there's an old story that's still true, which is that we have to help each other and do it ourselves. Right. There's not going to be, with the end of Grad Plus, there's not going to be another Grad Plus. There's not going to be a graduate Pell, as far as I can tell. Right. We have to work with each other to lift each other up and create the number, expand the number and kind of pathways to the master's and the PhD for our students and the populations we serve. I just want to see us get creative too. I do think remapping coursework is really important. The second to last bullet point there is important. Just designing and implementing stackable, affordable credentials is an affordability issue. If a graduate student cannot enroll full time for all the reasons we've said, then it's still possible for them to begin a certificate or a micro credential and then build on that and use it towards their actual completion of a master's or graduate degree. And then we do need more support across the board. So graduate assistantships of all kinds are one way to do that. Next slide.
And so what can institutions consider? We know that part of what the federal government is doing is trying to push tuition rates down because they've grown so much over the year. And then there's also the question about the value of education. But we know there's a value of education and a value for graduate school. So considering, are there new ways of looking at tuition structures? I know lots of states in Virginia have incentives to keep tuition flat. And so what can institutions do in terms of pricing for our students, given the changes in our federal policies? So fee schedules and total cost of attendance estimates must be transparent so no students know what they're getting into. They must be evaluated and adjusted to make sure that we are supporting our students and aligning with the missions of what we're trying to do as HBCUs. We got to look at the cost of attendance and what's possible in terms of capacity for these students because we don't want them to be vulnerable to predatory lenders because we know they are out there. So, are there things that universities can look at while sustaining the university? Because we know it's a balancing act. Tuition income supports the institution, supports the faculty to teach those students. But are there other kinds of financial support that can keep pace with the cost of living? In the state of Virginia, graduate assistants were required to get increases in their tuition, in their assistantship rate over the last 3 years. So we kept pace at what faculty and staff were getting, that graduate students had to get that as well. But we know that some of these packages are not livable wages for our students. So are there ways to increase those funding supports for doctoral students in particular? And what about those funding sources that many of us have access to with Title III? Given that the allocation is fairly substantial for graduate schools, especially in the STEM areas, what can we do in terms of using those funds to leverage additional support for our students at the universities? And then we also need to make sure our financial aid officers and CFOs and those leaders increase the support for student learning, especially in terms of managing debt, considering debt, looking at what the repayment plans are, considering the different options that are out there. We need them because they are the experts on finances and what students need to consider so that we can communicate that to our students so that they can make the best decisions possible to still get the degrees that will enhance their lives and our communities. And then finally, I know Scott and I have talked about this, is the data infrastructure for HBCUs are sometimes a challenge. Trying to understand what is the data to help us understand the impact of some of these issues. So we need to have better data systems so that we can pull up on it and make better decisions. We need to make sure our data is clean, robust, reliable, and actionable because data is what's going to sell what we need from other systems in our ecosystem. And the bottom line is we just got to communicate all of this to our external stakeholders. What is the value of a graduate education? How does it affect our communities so that we know that that educational premium is still there for graduate education so that it does not get lost in this conversation of what is the value of college. And college then drives graduate education. They cannot get these degrees without going through the undergraduate process because we need to set the stage for the higher learning that they need to do at the graduate level. So these are some of the strategies that we think we need to consider. And now we want to open it up for any questions that you might have in the audience.
All right, I am checking. We have one in the Q&A. The question is there a conversation going across HBCU graduate leaders about these strategies? And I will say yes. We have a monthly meeting where we come together and we talk about these strategies. And I will also say, I think, Scott and Desi both talked about this piece. And I'll just make it very, very plain for this room is that none of us believe in competition outside of athletics. And so we are all really concerned about the long-term growth and development of all of our institutions. especially right now, as historically, we have been able to survive some of these adverse policies by this administration prior to 2020 and now post. But th these individuals have been very, very shrewd in understanding higher education more this time than they did post COVID. And so, as you can tell, just as of yesterday, they tightened this OBBA policy as it relates to the Grad Plus loan going away. Because one of the things that we were telling our students was, make sure that you apply for a Grad Plus loan because you'll be grandfathered in, and part of that would be the cap would remain the same. As of yesterday, that cap now transitions with you if you are a current policyholder. So they are watching us very, very carefully. So I think, to my colleague's point, is we have to come together as historically Black colleges in the graduate educational space and write grants together, send our students to each other, look for philanthropic support together to ensure that these institutions last long beyond our time. I think we are currently out of time, but we have, if if the room is okay, I would like to at least address two or three more of these questions before we log off. Have another question, and I'll just so how we'll do it, colleagues. I'll ask Desi one, then Scott the next, and we'll try to get them all in before we get booted out. The next question is, what are reforms that grad schools need to make? Are too many credit hours being required? Are there more cost efficient ways to deliver instruction and compensate faculty? And Desi, that will be yours.
Okay. I think we have got to look at curriculum. We are traditionalists, and faculty like to do what we've always done, but I think we need to look at data. And I think we need to look at markets in terms of what the market needs, in terms of preparing students for the jobs that we're sending them out to, and streamline some of these processes and have more transparency in some of the processes that students need to go through to complete degree requirements. And so I think each program needs to evaluate market data to say these are the skills and these are the technical skills, the durable skills that are needed for a student to be successful in the profession. And we should be relying on those industries or those markets in which we're sending our students out to, be it a research space, be it industry space, a nonprofit space. We need to rely on that to reevaluate curriculum and then start to prepare our students more directly for those things, which means that we probably won't need all the stuff that we think we need because we don't have to do everything for a student who's in graduate school. You learn it as you also graduate. We need to prepare them for the entry level positions that the degree is preparing them for.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that.
All right, and so Scott, since this is a proud Hampton alum that asked this question, I'll ask you this. How are HBCUs considering redesigning curriculum to adopt meaningful pathways that lead to AI-driven careers?
Well, that's great. Yeah. So I think we talk a lot about this. Right now we are coming to the very end of our work on our AI policy. So that should be coming out and be published actually probably within the week, I hope, or in this near future. So that policy, though, building that policy has meant a lot of benchmarking, has meant a lot of reading other institutional policies, and it's meant a lot of conversation about what AI means across all of our units in the university system. Universities are complex, right? So what AI means to me and in the graduate college is very different than what it means for my colleagues in engineering, right? And I understand you're a Hampton engineering alum. So you may know, though, that we just launched our undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering, and one of the features of that undergraduate degree is that or we will be launching it in the fall. But one of the features of that degree is that it has AI baked into it, which wouldn't be the case if we were too traditionalist, right? So even in the process of developing that curriculum, I've watched the conversations and been a fly on the wall, listening to how we think about AI at the graduate level and how these programs prepare our students for graduate education, where AI is part of the conversation, and AI-driven careers are part of the part of the everyday work that our career services does, and part of the everyday work that our faculty do. It is very much a part of Hampton's conversations in leadership spaces. In the rooms that I am in, we talk a lot about AI. I guess redesigning curriculum in other respects, to me, just echoing what Desi said, is we got to have PhD programs that have concentrations and pathways that have AI baked into them. I want to, I need to see that our advanced degrees are preparing our students to enter the workforce, enter the careers they want to pursue in ways that are AI literate, and that has to happen in the curricular revision process as much as anywhere else. I do want to echo too what Desi said, that you want to see students having those experiences. I want to see them in the industry spaces. I want to bring industries into campus so that we have that interaction, and that interaction is part of the shaping driving force of what redesigned curriculum actually means, right? So it's not just the traditionalists in the room, but it's actually a genuine conversation. So we're really making the curriculum aligned with what what our students actually do with their degrees. Yeah.
And so for this final question, I'll ask that we all give a stab at it, and as part of our closing remarks. And so the question is there a collective strategy for educating students and prospective students about these reforms? And I could tell you that here at Clark Atlanta University, I'm working meeting with my partners in financial aid and our CFO to look at what that strategy is, and we are planning a webinar for our current graduate students, and then also for our prospective graduate students. And we're going to talk about all of the impacts. So we're going to talk about the impact of the Grad PLUS loan going away, what the other options are, and we're going to constantly communicate with those students throughout this process, so they won't have, if you will, sticker shock come July 1st to realize that that option is going away. And I'll say this as I close. I think Scott and Desi did a great job in highlighting the impact of it. And Scott also hinted at this. Grad Plus loan, as we know it, will not come back. We were at the CGS in December, and one of the presenters who was an economist stated very clearly, higher education is one of the longest funded entities in the federal government, and longer funded than any other entity that has been funded. And so the fact that this loan has gone away, and the fact, from my perspective, that you have not seen any lawsuits to try to at least slow that process down, suggests to us that it will not go away. I mean, it will not come back. And so, in that understanding, we, the collective, we have to be prepared and pivot to what funding looks like for the graduate educational space moving into the 22nd century. And I'll end with that note. Desi and Scott.
So I just want to say financial literacy in general is important to talk to our students about. I think we as a society do not do well with debt and money management kinds of issues. And so it is imperative for us as graduate leaders to provide those opportunities to students about how to do it better, how to consider their options, how to think through what all those things means in the short term as well as the long term. And so I'm also working with our financial aid office to see how we can improve upon that with our students and prepare them better for how to navigate the financial spaces that we all live in.
Yeah, I'd just echo both Reggie and Desi. Yes, working really, I think probably you'll see this across the space, but just a much closer interaction and working with financial aid officers and with CFO's office to bring forward and develop that collective strategy for educating students and prospective students. It's something I do. I mean, we've been our financial aid unit redesigned its website to do that work as well. So there is a public facing component to that. I'm glad that we're here talking about it. Something I do as well is interact with our graduate students through a couple different channels to educate them about their options. But it does, I think the game has changed so much that everyone has to be, as you said, much more literate about debt, about financial aid, about how it works, about how these back end systems interact with our students, their parents, their families, and our communities, because it is such a structural issue it cannot be ignored.
Well, thank you all for joining us. Thank you to the audience and the attendees for participating. And I want to thank the HBCU Center for inviting us to have this most important conversation. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your conference. And we go backstage.